So, how are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Just came back from vacation like a week ago and feels like it was just yesterday.
Where did you go?
I went to nowhere, to this festival in the middle of the desert in Spain.
Ah, very cool. Is it like bands or DJs or?
It's like a Spanish burn. You know, that like Burning Man, but that's a Spanish version, one of those European ones. Like really allows your head to be reset in a really nice way.
Yeah. Was it hot?
Yeah, it was fine. I don't remember that it was like especially hot. We have a community that you have like camp, and it has is basically made to avoid heat. So yeah, you have shower and you have like tents and stuff. Yeah,
That's cool.
yeah, quite good.
That's
I
cool.
can quite recommend it.
Are you into festivals in general? Do you go like every year or?
I try to go to like 2 or 3. One like basically how the work allows.
Okay.
Yeah, like electronic music, all this stuff. Yeah. Are you into this kind of stuff?
I'm into it. I wish I did more of them. I'm gutted I didn't go to Glastonbury this year. Apparently, it was really good.
Yeah, I heard about this one. I haven't tried it. No.
Yeah. No, I wish I did more of them. I have a friend in the UK, and he goes maybe to like 4 or 5 every year. He's very passionate about that.
Yeah.
But no, I wish I did more. I did one last year in Barcelona, Primavera.
Mhm.
That was good actually. They did a good job organizing it.
Yeah.
But
I try to stay away from like bigger ones like Primavera or Sonar, which is also here. I tried Sonar this year. I think wasn't super impressed by it, honestly. I think I'm starting to understand that the ones that I like are a bit smaller, like to like where you can get this atmosphere of basically if you get a smaller festival or smaller burn, by default, only the people who really love this kind of stuff are going to come. So you're going to get a
True.
special atmosphere of people really wanting to be here. Unlike Primavera, for example, or other like I guess I haven't been to Tomorrowland yet. I don't know if I want to try, but I think because they're bigger, music-wise and from all their perspectives, you have to be trying to serve everyone, like a lot of different tastes, like make it a bit more mass audience, and somehow you're losing that edge of becoming of making something special. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just super picky. I don't know.
I get it. I know what you mean. I went to this small festival in the UK a few years ago called Magical Festival. And it was, I think it was like 1,000 people, maybe a couple of thousand. But it was organized by a friend of a friend. So we got invited and I had a really good time. It was like super like friendly atmosphere, nice music still, very sort of family feel. So it was, it was really good.
Yeah, so because I think I'm not only after music, but also that kind of atmosphere and new friends. Yeah.
So you live in Barcelona. How long you been here for? How are you finding it?
Yeah, I think Barcelona was my sort of base for the past 6 years, but I think I would still question if I would have it like call it I'm living here fully because with so much travel, it's just I think I was here. I was sort of stuck here in a good way, which is a good thing during the pandemic. But yeah, I think I first came here like 6 years ago, or even 7 years ago. And it's loved everything here. Just it's a walkable city, like a lot of culture, like the city of the right size, how I call it. Like if you go up to 3, 4, 5 million, it's gonna be a different vibe. So I think I like the Barcelona's chill vibe, and everything else: the sea, the mountains, the people.
What brought you here?
I don't think there was something special that it wasn't like I was coming for work or something. It was more that I was always having in my head that I need to find something cool, and any city that I visited for work, for game development, I was asking myself, is that a place where I could stay for a bit longer? So before Barcelona, I tried Czech Republic.
Hmm.
Originally, I'm from Lithuania, so I tried a couple of cities there.
Me
I
too.
studied and spent. Oh, you did? Are you?
I'm from
Actually, I
Lithuania
guess
as well.
that could be the case because of your
Yeah, yeah.
surname. So if you want, we can switch to Lithuanian at some point. That would not be fun for most of our
True.
people who listen to this, but it would be fun for us, I guess.
Are you from
Um,
Vilnius or
no, I'm
whereabouts?
from Klaipėda.
I'm from Klaipėda. Oh,
Yeah, so I think because of that, I think I was always thinking that I gotta be in a city, or all of my bases need to be in a place where there's sea.
sure.
Even though I'm not a huge fan of the sea, I would not go to the playa, like to the beach every day. I prefer parks and stuff, but I think it has to be there just in case, right? Like you're
Just in
ending a
case you feel
party.
like it.
Yeah, like let's say you ended like you finished your partying in the club, and now you want to go someplace to just chill for like an hour and get a coffee. You would go to the sea. So obviously, or well, that's just one example, right? So yeah.
I think before I moved here, I was like, okay, I'm gonna move to Barcelona, gonna go to the beach every day. And I find myself now as well. I mean, I might end up there maybe like once a week or once every couple of weeks
Oh
or
yeah.
so. I like going for a run by the beach, but just to stay there. Summertime as well, it's quite busy, especially in Barcelona. So
Yeah.
I tend to go a little bit outside, maybe go to Sitges or to Orcata Beach, just outside of Barcelona. Um, I prefer those.
Yeah, I like going to the north, like Arenas del Mar,
Hmm.
and I think I recently found a couple of smaller places. What was that? Sun something. I don't. I'm bad with the topological names. But yeah, I think it's just a nice combo. When did you move?
3.5 years ago.
Oh, nice. That's I think that's probably like after 2 years, 3 years. That's where the line goes between like being a tourist and becoming like a more of a
Yeah.
local.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, for sure. For sure. I feel like I know the city quite well now. I know the places to go. I feel I've gotten used to it for sure.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I personally, I do want to stay here for longer. That's the plan.
Yeah. That's definitely feels like could be my permanent base as well. And I've been asking myself, if not Barcelona, where would I go? There's not a lot of places I would try,
I
honestly.
know,
Yeah.
because every place has its drawbacks or things that you look out for that may not necessarily fit what you're looking for. I mean, Barcelona is not perfect, but it's probably the most, at least for me, it has less flaws than other places. If I were to go
I
somewhere
think
else.
so. I think I definitely like from practical perspectives. There's a lot of stuff here that just fits my style, and especially living in the city. I don't know, like if you're within the city limits or the outside. I'm more of an inside person because I like the vibe. I like going
Me
out
too.
and meeting friends, and if I need to go like 20 minutes to go from like suburbs to Barcelona, I think that would be killing the thing for me.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe later we'll see. But also, I think I was there's one thing that I'm always curious about. I think I was reading Paul Graham's. I think that was his article, like from ages ago, about the fact that each city has its own, not the vibe, but each city has its own thing that is basically being emphasized here. Like he was giving an example. If you go to Cambridge, everybody it's all about smarts, right? You had to be. It basically it engages with you better. It gives you more energy if you're doing the thing that is most important in the city. For Cambridge, it's like it's the smarts. San Francisco or the Valley, it's all about like being in this community of startup people, and like it's all about startups. Obviously, there's other people living there that bring all kinds of business, but there's this thing that is the most important for the city, and if you're doing this thing, you're going to get the most energy and you're going to get the most power-ups, right? Then let's say London is all about money, New York is all about power. And so since I came to Barcelona, I was asking myself, what is this city for? What is the most important here? And I was hoping to get an answer of, oh, this is going to be IT or something, but
Sure.
I don't think that's the case, for good or bad. I think Barcelona, in my opinion, it's after all, it's more about the culture and arts and sports. I think
Yeah.
I'm not doing either of these, honestly. So I'm like doing a lot of culture. I'm listening to a lot of music. I'm going to a lot of movies and doing other stuff. But I think in this case, it doesn't seem like a con for me. It's I think I found my way to treat this as a pro, basically, because I think my style is that I work a lot. I focus a lot in my work, but then once in a while, like every weekend or some other times, I would just be unplugging and doing something completely different. And Barcelona gives you a ton of things to do, from like just going to the beach and relaxing, like doing senderismo. Forgot how is this called anyway. Hiking. That's hiking. And or just, yeah, doing like festivals and clubs and hanging out with friends.
I think you nailed it there. Sports and culture, for sure. There's a lot of culture here. I mean, video
Yeah.
games is part of the culture as well, but
Hmm.
also just, I don't know, going to theater, seeing art, and yeah, it has a lot to offer. And sports as well. I mean, people are always doing things outdoors here, going for a
Hmm.
run, cycling, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
If I may ask, what was you asked me what was my reason to move, and for me, I guess it was nothing special. Just I was looking for something really cool, and Barcelona just clicked with me instantly. What was your reason to move?
um, I guess the reason. So I was living in Lithuania at that time, and I was living there with my wife. And she's not from Lithuania originally, so she's originally from Romania.
Mm-hmm.
And um, for me, it was fine. I mean, I came back from Lithuania to Lithuania from living in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
After a
That's
while,
where your accent comes from, right?
yeah.
Because it's not
So
Lithuanian.
I lived in Leeds for about 10 years. I moved there when I was
Mm-hmm.
18,
Okay.
and so eventually, it wasn't really working for us.
Mm-hmm.
So we sort of realized that we needed to find a place that's more like I guess a place that works for both of us. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily wanting to live in Romania. I mean, I traveled to Bucharest a few times, and it's a nice city, but it's not necessarily a place for me. And same for her. It wasn't her vibe. So we traveled to Barcelona multiple times before, and sort of realized that perhaps we can try Barcelona. Both of us can work remotely. We don't necessarily need a place to yeah, I mean, any place would work for us sort of work wise. So Barcelona was just a place where we felt like we could be comfortable and have a lot of fun living as well. So we sort of jumped in a car one day, and we drove here all the way.
Yeah, I did exactly the same thing. I just pushed
Yeah.
all of my stuff that I had in the car
Yeah.
right here. Yeah.
And when we arrived, it was COVID, so there wasn't much happening here. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but things have changed since. I mean, it's the city
Mm-hmm.
has transformed completely since then.
Yeah, it sounds like a city right now is on the rise, in terms of people wanting to move in. At least maybe that's just my bubble.
Yeah.
But I see um, even from like industry people, a lot of my friends thinking or moving either to Barcelona or nearby, like Valencia, Tarragona, um, and just other people. Yeah, just non-industry friends, either moving already or planning. So I guess that's a good sign.
So, what's your story then? Obviously, you've been working in video games for a long time. Um, your journey into video games, how did it start? What was the kind of the first maybe project that you
Hmm.
had relating to games, or how did it all begin?
I guess you need like a short version or like a bit longer version. I don't want
Up
to
to
dwell
you.
too
Up to
much.
you. Whatever.
Well, I guess it started for me since I was studying in the uni back in the day in St. Pete in Russia when it was not as crazy. And so I studied as a programmer, and I think around that time, my friends and I were really into video games, and I started thinking, what if that would be the thing that I do, even though that was so far from reality yet. And yeah, I'm one of those like uni dropouts, and so when I dropped out, that was my first reaction, like, what if I get a job in video games industry? And I basically on my way back from St. Pete to Lithuania, I stopped by Vilnius, and I found myself a job in making games for consoles for PlayStation 2.
Okay.
That was a company called, back then it was called differently, but now the same company is called Nordcurrent. It's quite famous
Mm.
in
Okay.
Lithuania for mobile games, and now they're pivoting to PC. So that's where I started, like, I don't know, almost 20 years ago, making games for PlayStation 2. That was uh, I guess I'm super grateful to the team who took me when I was super young, and like basically had to learn on the way. But it's really fun. And I quickly, after a few years in different jobs, I realized that I want to go from programming one game and working in a team to running a studio that will allow me to have a like a higher, like a helicopter view of how to make games, not working just on programming. And I guess I also realized that I'm maybe not as good of a programmer. That might be the thing as well. And so I realized that running a studio, I would have a lot of fun, and that's what I did. I founded a company called Asteroids in 2008. I think that was then. It was basically when iPhones and Androids became a thing, like it became
Sure.
smartphones, and people gradually realized that's actually a gaming device, not just like business device, which previously had everybody believed that was the case. I ran the company for almost 10 years. We got quite a success in some areas, like we were doing some of our own IPs and some crazy games, and then we were quite successful in work for hire. But then by 2016, 17, I got sort of rearranged reassessed my priorities, my what I love to do, and I realized that mobile was a really good trampoline for me to get into the industry. I guess that was a lot like the same thing for many people, because unlike for PC and console, where the like threshold for entering the
Mhm.
market was quite high, on mobile you could just buy an iPhone, buy a license for like $100, and just start making games. And there was a lot of people who were successful that way. And so like even though that was a really good trampoline, mobile games were not the market that I was that I was liking. That was not kind of games that I was liking to do anymore. And like overall mobile market became like a performance marketing oriented thing rather than like the stuff that I liked about games, like PC and console stuff that is hit driven and in a different way. So I sort of downside the studio, sold the company, and started after like a year of a break where I did not do anything, just going to festivals and reading books and playing games. I joined tinyBuild, which was like a small up and coming publisher of indie video games back then. It was, I think, about 10 people when I joined.
Sure.
And so I joined the company because I realized that I want to be in a place where I can see and touch and work with a lot of talented teams working in PC and console market, which was the market that I was going to for. And in total, I think we spent together like almost 5 years with tinyBuild, going from really like a small company with a couple of really promising games to this juggernaut, like a public company with like hundreds of people. And so my journey there was going from a producer that was working on a critical projects, trying to like land them safely instead of crashing in the ground, and then going to building the whole production pipelines, such as release management, QA, localization, and then going finally to heading the whole producing, like a publishing unit. Where my job would be to hire producers, like building a marketing team, building community management team, and basically running the whole pipeline from signing games to releasing them successfully. And this journey ended in 2022. And when I realized that I already was with the company for like almost 5 years, now I wanted to get back to maybe something of mine. And this is how, after another break, when I did not do anything for like a year, I started a new company which is called Forklift, which is this. Forklift is a publisher, like a specialized publisher of systemic PC and console games, and we might want to go into that later. And that company I started like last year with my partner from US, and we already released first game, and it was basically the company was an answer to my own question, like what do I want to do next. And I realized that I really want to be in publishing, and I think publishing needs a different approach now, where there's a lot of indie publishers doing the same thing, and there's almost nobody who specializes and who has its own edge, who has its own audience, right?
Sure.
Something that like special. So I also on the side I collaborate with a VC like venture capital fund called the Games Fund, run by my friends Ilya and Maria, beautiful, like amazing people, and we're collaborating on. I'm helping with the PC and console deal flow and deals overall. So that's like semi short version.
Nice. I like that you always gave yourself an opportunity to just take a break from something that you built, take a breather, and then kind of come back and do something new. I think you need that sometimes, and it gives you fresh perspective and new ideas to work with. It's pretty cool. So just going back then to the start of it. So 2008, you said you started your first studio. So you mentioned you did your own games, but you were also doing like work for hire.
Yes.
How was the world like back then? I mean, how difficult or easy was it to find new contracts or new business? And yeah, what sort of games were popular back then? What were you working
on? So one thing that was evident for me, and this is kind of more of a hindsight, is that when a new platform comes in, as mobile, for example, the first few years, up to 5 years maybe, what's going to dominate the market there are games that are sort of older models, basically models and gameplays and mechanics and business, like even monetization models that dominated previous platforms. So in the forming years of mobile, there was a lot of games where you had those like most of them were landscape. You had a lot of virtual joysticks, and people were thinking of this as like a kind of a small console where everything is on a touch screen, and that's how you operate the game. And a lot of those older games come from casual, whatever was dominating in the market by then, like some of the PC casual games, some of the console games. So all of them was basically were going to mobile. And with time, people realize what's the platform is for. I think by 2013 or 12 is when the free-to-play mobile started. Like for the first free-to-play games, they were even, I think the way we're doing them is that you still had to buy something before you could be able, I don't remember the exact model, but it was like the first like few months were really strange where Apple was experimenting. But then suddenly they tried complete free to play and it just skyrocketed. So by then it was, I think almost like 2013, 14, it was evident that free to play is going to be the thing, and that's how it changed. And this is why after a few years I realized that's not the market that I'm going to be in. Now, speaking of like the how the market was and how easy was it to get work for hire partnerships and stuff, I think honestly I'm probably not the best person to. I can give my experience for sure, but I think maybe this is the case for other people. But the things that I know now, the network that I have now, the understanding of a market that I have now, it is I don't know, 50 times more than I had back then, because back then I just started. So when I think back to all these times, when I speak to people, to give you an example, when I speak to people who were already like veterans 10 years ago, when I speak to them now and they tell me the story of how 2008, 2010, 2012 were, they tell me stories and I'm like oblivious to any of that stuff, because I was super green back then. I was learning to how to go from being a programmer to becoming a studio director,
Sure.
and that's a totally different job. And now how to become an entrepreneur. So I think a lot of the stuff came over my head. I was just trying our best, and the whole team did this thing. But a lot of the macro picture, I think it was not as clear for us. For example, I think when I started the company in 2008, I was sort of oblivious, but to the fact that there was a lot of the market was there was a market crash, obviously, and everything went down. I think for us as a small team, that was not a thing that was impactful. We did not understand it, right? Because we just started. So now that I talk with more people, it seems like a lot of what's happening right now, post-pandemic crash, post-pandemic like winter in the market, to a lot of people, it reminds them of how things were in 2008, right? And to me, it's like, no, it wasn't. Like it was fine. I was starting my company, so we just needed 2 projects to get going. So we did
Sure.
not feel the same, the thing, right? So I guess everyone's experience was different. And ours was that we were a small studio and trying to find our place, and I did not feel like it was tough to get contracts. What I think was always tough for a studio like us back then, which was like 15, then we grew up to 30 plus. That trying to balance between trying to balance that's my appliances anyway. Trying to balance between work for hire and your original IPs. That is, I think, is the most complicated thing. And whenever I see any studios doing the same thing right now, I can basically chat about this, and some studios that do work for hire and now want to pivot into original IPs, I'm always giving them a lot of advice on how to try to avoid some of the pitfalls that are there. But that balance for us, I think, was the most complicated thing, especially for me as the one running the studio.
And is the reason for that is because it's like, why is it difficult to balance it both? Is it just the manpower that you need, or are there any other reasons? And is it better to always start? I mean, I would presume, right? So if you're starting as a studio, perhaps it's easier to start as a work for hire studio, right? Because you need cash flow, you need money.
Correct.
And then once you have that cash flow, once you have some projects that you're able to do and focus on, then if you still have people or if you have ideas, then you can potentially start gradually working towards your own project. I mean, is that sort of the best way to go about that? Or
I would say, yeah, that's probably the best way. The problem is that as long as you try and balance, it's always going to be you may fall into this pitfall of not succeeding in either of these things. And so making games, I think the way I understand it, making games is not a mechanical endeavor, right? It's not like you build a fabric or like a production line and it just comes together. I think you might, no offense to mobile studios, but sometimes it's like that in mobile studios when you know the kind of gameplay you want to do, and then you're adding a flavor. It's not like it's becoming more difficult right now again, but like some years ago, in the peak of the years, it was kind of like that. You know your gameplay, so you know how to find a flavor instead of setting and art, and you need to nail this. So it's less of an innovation on the gameplay side. Although again, that's not really. There's still a lot of mobile games that innovate. So in PC and console market, it's all about something unique, and I think the problem of trying to do both work for hire and original IPs comes from this different DNA. So if you're running a successful work for hire studio, your DNA is all about in the whole studio. Like everybody is in this state of thinking that we need to be careful with the most important things for us that we look for is budget,
Hmm.
timeline, and quality. So you're always having these three in mind, and that's your like most important. That's like if you go that's like on the altar. There's like those three things. You worship those because eventually that's what's making you money, right? You gotta be stay on budget, on timeline, and on quality. Then you're going to have more products, like more work for you, and that's how you survive as a studio. When you are a successful studio making an original IP, you are a little bit crazy. You are not thinking about, well, you're thinking about budget because you're limited by the budget. But if you're talking to the most successful studios, budget consideration and time consideration is like maybe fifth in their priority list. And first things are going to be originality, fun, like an amazing game, something that people lose their minds about. And the only then is like, okay, we also need to be mindful of the budget and the timeline, whatever. So these are crazy people in a good way. Well, sometimes in a dangerous way, but they like that's how you think about this. You're striving to make the best possible game, and you have to push your limits in everything. Like imagine that, like 3 months before you thought you're going to be having your release candidate done, you're finally realizing that one mechanic that you was trying to polish and balance is actually would be quite different. It would be quite amazing to change it. And you realize if you change this one thing, you're going to have to change a lot of other things. So there's a lot of risk, but potentially changing that is going to change the whole game, and it's going to go from good games to great games. A lot of those studios that are successful, they would go for that, even though if that would be risking like their livelihood, their lost money, their investors' money, they would go for that. You would not go that far with work for hire, and that's why I think from that DNA perspective, if you're trying to build a studio that has both, especially when you're exchanging people, they have to like maybe this project ended, they have to go back. I think it's going to be the most difficult to do. So I've seen a few studios succeed. Actually, even the first studio that we published, the studio of a game, like the game of a studio that we first published in Forklift, is exactly that.
Hmm.
But even them, they have this only worked because it was a really special case of a CEO being that like crazy good person that believed in the project, and then ensuring that the team that has worked on it has all the resources to make the game, and they were always pushing to those limits, almost like those studios that don't have any work for hire with them. Um, so I think yeah, you can probably succeed more if you try and separate those two under your one umbrella in the studio, and have
Right.
it so that there's like work for hire studio is one studio, and then original IP is a completely different one. But then morale wise, how do you make it so that people who are working work for hire do not want to go into original IP? How do you make it so that they're like quite different companies, and there's no like jealousy between people? Or you're working on these original games, so I have to like slay myself with this work for hire. Anyway,
Sure.
there's a lot of challenges there. So some of the most successful studios that I've seen started with some work for hire, but then quickly, as quick as they could, they were transitioning to original IPs, to their own games, and from there, if you're successful, then your first game is going to give you enough money to work on a second game, and ideally, you don't get back to work for hire. Otherwise, it's going to be always that like swamp of not being able to fly. Maybe this
Yeah.
is too dramatic, but I mean,
No, I know what you mean. And then I guess if you're a work for hire company, you're very much dependent on how the market is, right? On the market conditions in general. If the market is good, if there is
yeah,
enough work out there, you're doing fine. But if the situation is like it is maybe nowadays, where I see
yeah.
some work for hire studios shutting down, probably that's not the best way to go about it. Do you think? But equally, at the same time, what I'm seeing is that there are some work for hire studios that are opening up, but they're very specialized. I don't know
Hmm.
whether they're doing just Unreal or to just focus on like a specific segment of work for hire. Do you think now it's a good market to open something like that? Like what's like, or maybe what you've been seeing?
Hmm. Um, That's an interesting question. I don't think I've ever thought about, because I've never thought about like for since I um, stopped working work for hire. I don't think I've ever entertained an idea of how would a successful work for hire studio, how it should be run. I think it's basically just two opposite strategies. Either you're becoming this, like if you are specializing in everything, like let's say you're starting with both engines, you have specialists that are working with Unreal and Unity, then gradually maybe you're going to add something else, like specifics for like I don't know, co-development, in some specific projects like multiplayer stuff. There's studios that specialize, that have their own teams working with like retro, like legacy stuff that is also quite popular. Um, but then I think in the end, it's either you go all like generalist or you go specialist, similar to like when people think of their own talents, like how they want to develop themselves. So I guess maybe the same thing applies to studios, that either you go wide and become this. I in the future, I think that means that you are going to have to go big as well. Like if you go to those bigger studios, specializing in work for hire, they would do everything. They would do art, they would do localization, they would do QA development, like like basically everything that's possible in the industry, they would be able to do. And that's one approach. And then the other approach is just to go super specialized. Like again, there's studios that I know that not only specialize in let's say Unity, right? They also, their whole pipeline, like the way they work, it's only one kind of pipeline. So they work with certain types of tools, they work with certain types of repositories, and that's like I've seen the studio just say no to a lot of contracts that were not matching their pipelines, saying we're not going to be really successful in this case because our strength in this pipeline. If your project for some reason is not applicable for this, we're afraid that we're not going to do a great enough job. And so, but then again, I don't know from commercial perspective which one would be more successful. I think it's more in line with what you believe would be the right company for you, because it's not everybody wants to run a like 500 people company, right? And there's a lot of people who don't want to have like a small 20 people company as well. So I think it boils down to that.
Sure. Going back to your days with tinyBuild then. So you mentioned you started with the company when there were 5 of you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then you helped.
I think there was 5 of us in publishing and then 5 more in porting. We had a small porting team that helped all these like indie teams go to consoles.
How did you grow from a small publisher to a massive publisher like tinyBuild is today? What happened there in those few years that you know just catapulted basically you into becoming this big studio?
Well, and at later stages, I'm going to go from the back. At later stages, when the company, like a few months before the company went public and a few months after, tinyBuild we had acquired quite a few studios, and even one other publisher, Versus Evil, which that story did not end well, unfortunately. But it was a lot of acquisition happening. So I think in later stages, how the company grew from like 50 to like 400 something, it was mostly through acquisitions. We acquired, I think, 12 or 13 studios, indie studios that we knew quite well, that already were making interesting games. And so that sort of made sense back then to make them part of the family. And again, Story versus Evil, which itself I think was like 200 people between the publishing unit itself, and they had this work for hire unit called Cerberus, based in Latin America, which back then was supposed to be kind of a helping in production tinyBuild, but I don't think that sort of integration really happened, and that was basically after my time, so I cannot really comment on that. But in the forming years, in the beginning, I joined the company when tinyBuild has just shipped Hello Neighbor, which was eventually still, I think it is the most successful game in tinyBuild's portfolio. Like really interesting genre that basically started subgenre of horror games where AI is chasing you and you're just trying to find ways to avoid them, then it basically became a thing that a lot of copycats and a lot of other games on PC, console, and mobile went the same way. So back then, I think my job was to start with my first, well, I think in the first year, was my job to ensure that as a company, tinyBuild would be able to release more than like 2-3 games a year, which was the case back then. We knew that we wanted to scale up, and now we needed the capacity for ensure that we can deliver those games in a really good quality. And so as a indie publisher, you're working with a lot of teams that are indies with like not a lot of resources, with little small teams, and often they would be doing something that's either the first project of theirs or
Mm-hmm.
maybe the second project that is much bigger than the previous thing. So like all of these games would be kind of a difficult endeavors for every team, so they needed a lot of support from a publisher on anything, on QA, on localization, on porting, on producing, even just advising them how to avoid the usual pitfalls. So this is why gradually, really slowly, we started with growing the team of producers. So I guess one of my first interesting challenges was to find, together with the team at tinyBuild, with the co-founders, to find what is the meaning, what is this tinyBuild producer, what is that creature, what is the skill set of a tinyBuild producer, how would we like them to operate? Because before that, there was no that role in the company. The only producer was Alex, the CEO of the company,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess I was the second. So we were thinking how it works. So it started with us building this team of producers to be able to support those indies, and realizing that there's a lot of production capacity, production skills, production expertise that needs to go into those teams. We started with looking for producers who are really good at running um, production pipelines for PC and console games. Gradually, this shifted to also realizing that now producers need to be much more marketing wise, because of like the way the company was built was pretty it was not super hierarchical, so everything was really working together, which was good and bad sometimes. Because it's good because you have a lot of serendipity happening, and everything is kind of together, so everybody knows what's happening on all the projects. But from the other perspective, when you get hit certain number of projects, it's becoming a mess that you need to manage, and somehow start to separate those things into teams and stuff. So I guess long story short, we started with building producers, and then it came to seeing what do we need to do, what do we need to have internally of expertise to run a successful like a publishing. And this came to realizing that we need a lot of release management capacity, because releasing on consoles is its own separate creature that needs a lot of energy and a lot of really attentive people,
Mm-hmm.
because managing those stores is just it's son of a bitch. It's really difficult. Then the same happened to localization QA, where we needed to build a system that would be that would be able to serve many games at the same time. Let's say in the same month you have 5 games that require a lot of QA, and that's like from really small teams of like 2 people to really big teams of 10 people testing something really difficult like a multiplayer game. So we built a system that was the idea of that was built on the fact that we had to have internal capacity, like a small internal capacity for doing QA, and a lot of expertise of how the QA needs to be run. And we would also rely on a network of trusted partners that would be able to provide us their QA resources within like a week or two, right? So every month we would basically plan like a 3 months ahead, and this would allow us to be flexible on not spending too much time on some like on a huge QA team, but then also be able to provide to some of these indie teams that required QA, sometimes even quite unexpectedly, right? And the same principle applied to everything else, to localization and porting and art outsourcing capacities, is that we would have internal resource, internal expertise, and how to run this specific area efficiently, and a network of providers who would work with us on a regular basis.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
What would you look for in those indie studios, and in terms of like, I don't know, what sort of games were they making? What sort of teams were behind them? What are the sort of important things for you to consider before you chose the studios that you wanted to work with? What sort of selection process you had?
So you mean tinyBuild specifically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my tinyBuild experience, like the way I was, one of the things that I remember as a quite big endeavor is with the team of producers and with the co-founders of the company, but mostly between this, like one of the first co-founders of the company, Tom Bryan, and me. We had to at some point reveal the whole pipeline of pitches and scouting. Those, how would we get those cool games? Because in the beginning the process was quite chaotic. We would have just an email and all the pitches would be coming there, and and there was no proper process for how to run this and how do we discuss games. It was just somebody would just take a game and say, it's a really cool game, let's sign this, it's amazing, it just plays really well. So you would have to talk with a couple of people, and then you talk with the co-founders of the studio of the tinyBuild, and I would say, yeah, let's do that, let's figure out the how to sign a game. And then at some point when you become a bigger company, and then I think you realized after a couple of cases where you would lose a really cool game because you were not as organized, you finally sit down and say, okay, let's find a proper way of running this, and this is what we did. So yeah, we did the whole process for how to go through pitches and how to pick best games within like a small team of producers. I guess for tinyBuild specifically, there's a, I guess it's you can describe what it is, what tinyBuild game is, but back then I think it was a bit more murky. It was not as easy to understand, and this is actually was part of the reason why at some point I decided to leave, because I think the company back then, after going public, we were trying to do too many things at once, and I at some point understood that's not really what I want to do. I think, and this is how after that how logically I came to the idea of Forklift, right? Because I realized that I don't want to do like 15, 20 different genres and 15 different verticals that a lot of indie publishers do. I want to specialize in just one niche and just go with that. So back then with tinyBuild, one of the most important things is to have a game that is going to be engaging with streamers. Something that you just take a look at the GIF of that game or a short trailer, and you see that this is going to attract eyes, no matter what, right? And if you marry that with the great team that you just believe is going to be able to ship this, because sometimes you have a really cool something there in the game, but then you speak with the team and you don't feel like they will be able to, like the way they think about the game, the way they explain their roadmap, their vision, and the way they respond to your feedback, you just feel it's not going to be an easy work with them. So let's just not, maybe it's not our studio, right? But otherwise maybe a good game. So yeah, it's really product centric and team centric, I would say. Yeah.
And how does it work for you now then? So you said with Forklift, you're specializing in some sort of niche, right? So you're focusing on certain type of games. What are you focusing on? And if I'm a studio, if I'm working on a game and I'm looking for a publisher, what's the best way to approach you? And what are you looking for, perhaps in those games? What are you looking for in the teams behind them? What are you?
So the way we describe our niche is is, well, especially to developers, right, in a B2B environment, is we are after systemic games. So if you, an easy way to understand what a systemic game is like versus like systemic is one side of spectrum and content driven games are the other side of the spectrum. So if you take any of these games where the story or the characters are the most important ones, the most important thing in the game, that's content driven game. So anything like, if you take any of these bigger um, action adventure games, God of War, Uncharted, Last of Us, that's content driven games. You play the content driven game once, you know the story, you know the characters, you know all the what's happening in the game, and you're kind of done with it, right? You might be able to replay some of these games, you would able to replay for many times, but you would still get the same experience more or less.
Sure.
And at the same time, systemic games is something that was built on systems, and they have emergent gameplay as a result of all these systems intersecting and giving you something new every time. So like puzzle games are, like if you think about non-video games, puzzles are basically content-driven games. You've done a puzzle and you know how to do it, while something as chess is systemic. You can play chess for 2,000 hours and not being bored, because every time it's something different and you become better and better.
Sure.
So to put this into practical perspective, we're after anything that's endless and systemic, which is all the management games, tycoon games, city building games, simulation games, strategies, automation, crafting. All of these subgenres are a huge bubble of systemic games. Everything that's like like I said, emergent and systemic and endless and smart. That's what we specialize in.
Okay, I get it. Why this particular niche? Because you think those games are successful, like nowadays, and why did you pick this niche as opposed to all the others?
I think I would say it's a really lucky coincidence for us. I think it's in the intersection of what I like personally and what my partner in this business is also a huge fan of. To give you an example, the one of the games that I signed for tinyBuild and I found it and brought to the team. It was the game called Cartel Tycoon, which was it's a game. How to describe it? It's like a drug dealing builder, like a city builder, where you operate this like fictional drug cartel in a fictional Colombia of the 80s,
Okay.
right?
Pretty cool.
Really awesome team, really cool game. And we signed, that's a curious story about this one. We signed it basically based on 15-second GIF. So by then we knew the team is capable. They've had some things in the background, have delivered some games before. And then what they did was just outline the concept and made a really short GIF of showing this like a isometric view of a really green, lush map with trucks moving, well, kind of cocaine or what's some sort of drugs, going in line from this warehouse to a laboratory, and they move like the way the camera, the way was the whole shot was done, only 15 seconds. You already knew that if somebody would make a game that looks like this, it's going to be successful. It ended up not being like a huge success, but it was definitely like a successful game, especially as a first game of that studio. It was amazing. So I guess when I left tinyBuild, I was asking myself, what kind of games do I love myself? And so, like I said, it was a really lucky coincidence for me that I'm a huge fan of these games, but also in the market right now, if you look from the perspective of streamers and players, and if you look from the perspective of Steam and Xbox and PlayStation, all of them are actually narrowing down on the fact that those systemic games are the most successful. Well, I mean, the chances of succeeding in this niche is I think are the highest. And that is also the niche where a lot of smaller teams can perform really well. with huge success. Because on the other side of the spectrum, if you're going after content-driven games, they're now struggling. There's still a lot of those games, and I'm actually hoping that people are going to continue making those games. I'm also a huge fan of play a lot of these, but making them is really difficult. And from the budget perspective, and from the perspective of the fact that making like a 10-hour long content driven game is extremely expensive, and comes with its own set of risks. So yeah, I think it makes sense from the business perspective.
Sure.
And it makes sense from perspective of this is the kind of stuff that I like to play myself. So I guess I was lucky.
What's the typical deal between the publisher and the development studio? I heard somewhere, I think one of the conferences that I went to, that a publisher typically takes like 50%, plus they need to recover the investment that they gave to the development studio at first. Is that right? Is that how it works?
That's more or less the case. Nowadays, there's two powers that are trying to change that status quo. But overall, you're right. Like if you would come to tinyBuild, like maybe or any other publisher in indie space, like 3-4 years ago, you would probably get that kind of deal that the publisher invests in development, basically giving advance on development. Then we also invest in marketing and covering all the localization, QA, porting costs. And then we need to recoup. So any money coming from the game would first go to recoup those advances. And then from there, we would share revenues like 50-50 or like 40-60 in different ways. Nowadays, there's two powers that are changing the thing. So first of all, publishing space has become super crowded. There's a lot of publishers competing for every single cool game out there. So a developer who has something something cool done, like some sort of really great prototype or like some other ways of showing traction, I think they can expect to get at least few offers and basically be able to choose from them. Or even sometimes, if I were them, I would play one publisher against each other because like you're trying to get the best deal. So that's the one power that is changing this. The saturated market is making so that the deals now have to be more competitive. So it's not uncommon right now to see a publisher recouping their either not recouping at all whatever they invest. That sometimes that's the case, or recouping at a different rate. For example, whatever we invest, we recoup at 50-50. So we're recouping our side, and already the team gets like 50% of revenues.
Sure.
Also, that comes different from the fact that we're not often covering the whole development budget. So we mostly invest marketing. That's a whole other story we can cover. And then another power that is changing this is the fact that the market is becoming tough. So if there was like 3 years ago, there was so much money in the market after pandemic years, and now everything has gone to really like a hard place. So basically, the balance between on one hand, you have a lot of publishers trying to compete, and you get better offers. On the other side, landing an offer and landing a publishing partner or financing partner is becoming more difficult because there's just less money in the market. So everybody has gone super careful. So if we had this situation, like just whatever,
sure,
I've seen so many quite stupid deals done in the past in those pandemic years, and now it's like sobering up, like a bit of a hangover. So everybody's like, "Oh no, we're not investing this in this anyway." So yeah, so in between those, you can probably see how things are changing. So some games struggling to get any sort of deals and will probably end up not finding a partner, while some other games can actually benefit from that saturated market and get better deals because there's more publishers offering them something cool. Yeah, I would say that's happening at the same time, like strangely.
I also saw a few successful Kickstarter stories recently.
Yep.
I think there's a studio from Netherlands. They just raised maybe like 100,000 to finance their game.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just of the fact that I think it was difficult for them to find a publishing deal.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a few other stories like that. There's also stories of companies having signed publishing deals, but then publishers pulling out
Oh, that's
eventually.
the worst. Yeah,
How
unfortunately,
does
that's.
that happen? Do you not get any guarantees as a development studio if you sign a deal with the publisher? Like, how does that? Why does that
I
happen?
mean, every contract is different. In some cases, you might, especially when you're working with bigger publishers or even platforms, some of them have the contracts where if something happens, you might even get away with like getting still the bulk of the budget and being able to release the game on your own or finding another partner.
Sure.
So you're not left there hanging. But that I would say that's an exception. Basically, every contract, no matter what you have in there, it still has a lot of those what ifs, like what if this happens, what if this happens. And in the end, some of the publishers are just unable um, to support that many games because they were expecting like maybe better revenues from previous games, and this has not happened. Maybe they expected like a financing round, and it did not happen. So they have to now find a solution to them only having resources for 10 games and them having like 20 games in their portfolio, in their pipeline. So there's not going to be a good examples. It's just shades of bad things, right? So yeah, unfortunately this happens. I would say it's really difficult to find a safeguard against this because like it's imagine you're trying to land a contract with a publisher and not only getting what you want in terms of revenue share and marketing support and development budget that has enough wiggle room and some like things for like some contingency for something unexpected, but then also trying to add the clause that would say that whatever happens, like even you guys don't have money, you still owe us money. Like this is literally just impossible, right? So it's just a bad coincidence that this happened right now with the market. So I would not. Yeah, basically, I don't know what would be the best way to try and safeguard against this. The only thing is just have a really good relationship with your partner and ensure that
Sure.
you are getting as transparent picture as you can when you contact with them. So I guess that's the only way that I see.
So besides developing or building Forklift Interactive, you also work for the Games Fund, right? As a venture partner.
Yes.
Can you talk me through your work there? What are you responsible for, and what kind of companies you invest in?
So the Games Fund is a pure venture capital firm, which means that we only invest in equity. We, at least at the moment, we almost never do project funding deals. That might change in the future, but right now it's pure equity. As a venture company, your model is different from publishers. Is that as a publisher, you're making money releasing a successful game, like a certain game, right? Not just any game from the studio. You're signing for a particular game, you're making it successful, and you're hoping to get. I think the baseline for most publishers would be anywhere between 2 and 4x return on the investment.
Okay.
Which would be considered a good return, right? Obviously, you strive to get like 10x and 20x, but that's not in your base model. You might have a luck to get that, but that's if you get 3x, 4x, that's enough for you. And then in a venture environment, you are basically signing a much more ambitious projects that you either expect to completely flop or to become the next Fortnite. And so that model dictates what you want to sign, right? So I think a lot of indie games are not really would not be such a good investment from the VC perspective, even though there's still so many successful games. I think just the majority of them would be much more fitting for a publishing model than a VC model. So speaking of VC model, we are after, like, first of all, TGF, we're investing anywhere from 500K to 3 million. And we are after bigger games. I would say ideal spot would be AA. And we're investing in things specifically in the console side, in PC side. It's something that can become a huge franchise as a premium game, or something that can become a really cool evergreen game as a service type of thing, right? Either multiplayer or even a premium game, but just by the kind of game it is, it has a lot of a lot of promise in terms of like DLCs and updates and stuff, similar to, like, say, Satisfactory or like Deep Rock Galactic, stuff like that. So I think that would be the best way to describe our focus. And the way VCs operate is also quite different from publishers. So it's there's a lot of materials about that, and like publishers and VCs have different types of controls over the studios and different kind of motivations as well. So if publisher is interested in maximizing the success of that game, then a VC is interested in maximizing success of a studio, right? People might even look past this first game that you have in the pipeline, and then you are caring a lot of how the company is doing overall, how interesting the company looks to the future investors and the future buyers, and basically what's going to be what the company is going to be 5 years from now, basically.
And so at what stage do VCs typically invest in terms of, like, how sizable does the company need to be? Where is the project supposed to be? I mean, conception stage is all right, or do they need to have some sort of vertical slice, or do they need to be pre-production?
Specifically TGF, we are a seed stage, pre-seed and seed stage fund. So this means that, well, this basically you can understand that from a average check that I've put as like 500K to 3 million. This is typically like a pre-seed and seed stage round, right? In terms of the readiness of the game, I think it's a bit closer to when a publisher signs a game. If you are a new studio, or maybe you have a lot of experience but you're coming together as a new studio, like this is still a new team, like in this capacity they make their first game, then most of the partners in the VC area, in the VC industry, and the publishers will expect at least some sort of prototype, something playable, ideally something even a bit more polished, that you can see not only like just a white box build, but something that gives you a taste of the game, of the experience. And then if we talk about a studio that have done something before, or this like a team that is such a experienced team that have done amazing stuff before, and now they're striving to make something in the same niche but completely new, then I've seen some deals done when it would be just concepting stage, like basically just a paper pitch, a few visuals, some development done, but not a lot. And this is still can happen, right? It's just a matter of combination of your experience as a team and what you can show as, or maybe it's just so crazy of an idea, which also happens sometimes, that VCs are just cannot stay away from that. It's so good that let's just try it. We know it's a huge risk, but that's, after all, that's what venture capital is for.
Sure. I mean, sometimes it's the founders as well, right? So, as you mentioned, right, if the team has experience, if the founders have experience developing successful games in the past, if they are capable of articulating that and, have a crazy, really good idea, why wouldn't you try, I guess, if you have the capabilities. How many projects do you typically fund every year?
I would say, so overall, I think TGF right now, we are at 20 investments in the first fund, while the new fund is being started. So between 5 and 7 investments a year. That's I think it's a good chunk. And TGF is still a boutique VC fund. We have a small team, and despite that, every portfolio team has some attention from us, and when they need it, right, we prefer to ride shotgun and help when they need it, but then never actually drive the car of a business. So yeah, that would be like 5, 7, maybe 8 deals a year.
Gotcha. What's the typical equity that you take away? Are you able to share that or no?
I will not be able to share that, but I can give you an idea of how we think about this, and not just us, but also like any seed stage VC, is that you want to get, obviously, well, not being greedy. We are, after all, we're basically working to the benefit of our investors as well, because as a VC you have a lot of LPs and you're basically making sure that you make money for them and for you. So you have to get a proper deal done, but then you also have to ensure that as a seed stage VC, there's going to be at least 1 or 2 or 3 more rounds of capital going into the company. And you need to ensure that with how the company is going to grow in capitalization, in market value, you want to ensure that by the third or second round, the founders are still getting a decent share.
Sure.
Not to imagine you're taking 40% in the seed round, and then in the next round, your founders, like let's say 2 founders, they're going to be diluted to like 15% each. How much motivation they will have in the company to work in the company? So you got to be balancing that. You want to be getting a decent share, but then think about founders, think about future rounds, and that's how the logic is. Basically, every case is different, but you're thinking in those terms.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
that is attractive as well for future companies that will be writing bigger checks as well.
Yeah.
To be able to get a good chunk of the business.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
But also, I would say, if I may interrupt you, I think right now what I see, so we already spoke about publishing, we spoke about VC a little bit. I would say that the way I see market moving right now, I think in the next 3 to 5 years, what's going to dominate, well, not dominate, but what's going to be on the rise really fast is project funding, where it's a mix of a publishing and a VC funding, where you get funding for a revenue share, not for equity, and you're basically then free to either self-publish a game or find yourself a publishing partner, or even just agency who is going to work with you on a flat fee basis, right? So I think some of the VC funds, some of the publishers maybe even, and are going to move that way to some extent. You already see some companies such as like Innersloth, the creators of Among Us, just announced their funding arm, and some new project funds happening right now. And I'm even hoping that at Forklift we're going to be able to pull something similar off quite soon. And I think that might be for quite a few indies, especially the ones that are capable of self-publishing and get good results. That might be a really good option that they would need to consider, right? I just wanted to balance out the whole picture between publishers and VCs, and now there's this third option.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of people should be considering that. That sounds like a good option. Sure.
Yeah. It's definitely up and coming.
So just talking about you then personally, so obviously you had experience in building teams, in building studios. You invested in studios, you met a lot of founders, you saw some success stories, probably a lot of failures. From your perspective, what makes a good team? What sort of teams succeed and what teams fail? What do you think are the important things for those teams to have, or companies to have, in order to be successful?
I think that's one of the most difficult questions ever, to me at least. You're right that I've seen so many teams. I've seen quite a few successes and a lot of failures. I don't think I've got one really good example. I wish I could, and maybe then I finally sit down and write a book. But that's a really good question. I think I already mentioned one thing that was in the context of some teams, like their DNA is in the right place. That like that difference between work for hire studios and original IPs. I think some of the most successful teams that I've seen, they have this quality that I think it's hard to pinpoint how to call it. It's not just being crazy, because it's just it's a cliche, right? Best teams are crazy, whatever. They have a really the founders of the studio that are like game directors, people who are basically responsible for moving forward the whole idea of the game. They have this quality that they are quite stubborn in their ways. In sometimes it's like, as a producer, when you work with those teams, it might even be super difficult because they are stubborn in so many little ways. Like trying to change something, either like trying to perfect the mechanic or something, or like a visual aspect of the game. And I think that I eventually, probably this is what's called like a creative vision that is at the same time stubborn, but also allowing the team members, or like other members of the team, to influence that and bring some fresh ideas and trying to challenge that, right? So I think that right combination of being completely sure in how the game needs to be made and chasing that with incredible energy and just going for that no matter what, but then also being able to hear that your players complain about something, or they're not really happy with something, and maybe your team, one of your, like, let's say, designers in the team, saying, I tried this and this feels really great. Being open to that while still continuing on your really like dedicated journey to that vision, I think that combination is the key. But then I also, when I'm explaining this, I'm realizing how generic it is, how generic it sounds, right? But I think that's the only thing that I can understand right now, because from all the other perspectives, I think the teams, successful teams, are quite different, like in terms of their like culture, and how flexible it is as a company, or like is it a remote company or not? Is it like there's a lot of discipline, or there's more chaos? From that perspective, I've seen all kinds, and I don't think any of these things is really the recipe to me. And this is when we talk with when I talk to any team, and when I'm sort of helping to make the decision whether we want to offer something to this game or something to this team, I'm actually looking after this quality. There's a bunch of other things. We have even like the whole, at Forklift, we have this like scoring system that is looking at the game, at the market, at the team, and at the business. But after all, the first thing I want to see is like, what is this feeling I get from the team? Do you have this thing that is like really being stubborn in their ways and having this really perfect vision of the game? Even though they understand completely that they're going to have to pivot like 5 times before they find this fun. It still needs to give you this vibe of like, we are sure that this is going to be amazing in this way, and they like have their own crazy idea.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. It's a good advice as well to follow, perhaps for people who are looking to start their own thing and build their own company. I like that. Maybe just to finish this off, then, what's your goal when it comes to forklifts? You know, what are your kind of big ambitious plans, if you have any?
Yeah. Well, I think good way of, we have a bunch of companies that are role models for us. One of them is I guess Paradox, and I think I've seen so many other companies try and say that, and I know this is a Paradox is different, and it's also like a really complex big company that is different from what it's been before. But I think the reason we think that's a good model is that that's one of those unusual situations on the market where a publisher and developer of of games has their own following, and there's a lot of people that we've done a lot of like a consumer development, understanding what our players like and how do they play. We at Forklift we're really data centric. We do a lot of play tests and we hear a lot of feedback and we ask what people like to play, so we know what our audience is like. And if you speak to some of the players, if you ask them what kind of games they play, and they will just say to you like, "Oh, well, playing Paradox games." So honestly, my goal, like end goal for Forklift, no matter how big the company is gonna be, I think I want to have like an audience, hopefully big audience, but even if it's not big, it's still fine. Audience of people who are saying we're going to play. I'm playing Forklift games. So to me, I think that's the end goal. The whole idea of Forklift is built on the fact that we want to serve to a certain audience. All the
Sure.
games we want to sign, and we are having in our pipeline, are built are signed with the idea that these games, this audience that we have in mind, they're going to like these games. And this is like when we like explain our brand to the outside, to B2C sort of area, we explain this as like endless, deep, endless smart games. And so that is the audience we have in mind. And if like 5 years from now we have I meet a person in the airport waiting for their flight, and I'm asking them what games they play, and say, well, I play this Forklift games, like whatever they sign, I wanna play. So that would be an amazing thing to have.
Nice. Well, I wish you that. I wish you that. Thanks for coming over. It was really interesting.
Thank you, Thomas.
And yeah, I appreciate
It was
you.
really good chat, and yeah, I hope it was interesting for some people that you're listening to your podcast.
I think so. I think so. Thank you.
Yeah.